back, all you nerds. This is Nerdy by Nature. And on this episode, as we mentioned in our last episode, we're going to be going over Firefly, the sci-fi western cult classic that caught on and unfortunately ended just as soon as it began. It was mishandled by Fox at the end of the day, but Charlie, nevertheless, this is a show that was widely accepted by a small niche of fans, and they really loved it, and it ended up being one of the most popular shows that never was.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's actually gained in popularity since it was canceled and people have been told to go back and watch it. But it was not as popular as it needed to be.
No, and
basically
hard for it to be honest. And if you're just joining us for the first time, just a reminder for new listeners, I'm one of your hosts, Agent Smith.
And I'm Captain Rogers.
And so the pilot episode for Firefly. So initially we should really start where it all began, and that's not at all the pilot.
Right.
It's one of those where, again, like we said at the very top of the show here, Fox unfortunately incredibly mishandled the promotion of this show,
right.
Mishandled the release of this show. To the best of our knowledge, episodes were shown completely out of continuity, and it's enough to drive anybody mad. Fortunately for us,
right.
We were able to watch them the way that it was originally designed.
Yeah, it was very weird because, I watched the show a while back, a couple of years ago. It was on Netflix and I watched it then, and I don't really remember how it was put on there, so I don't know that I watched it in the same order or not, but I know that was a big thing when it was on TV, was that they put the episodes out of order. How that happens in a big TV network, that's beyond me, but anyway, so I watched it back a couple years ago, and I really enjoyed it then. And then they did make a movie right after the show ended, and it was an opportunity for them to tie everything up and try and give the ending to the show to the fans that were upset that it was canceled. But yeah, it was very mismatched and mishandled by Fox.
And I can't even imagine, if you'd hop in a time machine and go back to 2002, which you wouldn't have to go that far back, I guess, so you wouldn't burn very much time machine fuel.
Right.
But regardless, it's one of those, I'm trying to picture what it would have been like to watch this show and see how disjointed it was. It was doomed from the start, really. It never really had much of a chance, unfortunately, which I suppose, silver lining, of course it was directed by Joss Whedon, which everyone, when you speak that name, you know his work and his resume. That's one of those where if the show would have went on, who knows, maybe he would have not had a chance to work with the X-Men like he did, or had a chance to eventually become the mega-hit success director of the Avengers movie.
Right.
And all the other actors may have not necessarily went on to get some of the roles that they have throughout their careers. So it could have went a number of different ways, obviously. But, why not? We'll go ahead and start with the pilot episode, the longest episode by far.
Right.
Hour and a half.
Yeah, because it was weird. I started watching it on the website, and I was almost not sure that it was in the right order there. And then you had said something about that, and I'd forgotten that was part of the original release. So I started looking it up on IMDb's webpage to look up the order in which to watch them, and it's all over the place everywhere. I can't tell which is the right...
Which way's up and which way's down.
Exactly, because IMDb's got a totally different release schedule. I think they've just got all the episodes listed as they were released as far as the date they were released, and that was not the right release order. So I'm pretty sure that we watched it in the right release order.
I'm fairly positive that we did, because the way I was able to stream it on Hulu, so for those listening, it's available on Hulu, and also, of course, you can watch the movie Serenity on Hulu as well. So both are available on that streaming platform, and to the best of my knowledge, it is in chronological order, because from a continuity standpoint, everything made sense, and every episode followed one another, even to the point that towards the later episodes, I should say, not necessarily, they're older now, but
right.
As you're watching them later episodes, they would say previously on Firefly, and then it would logically show clips from the episode you just watched, so there wasn't any kind of disjointment.
Gotcha.
It was all very smooth and well put together.
Yeah, I don't have Hulu, so I watched it on Amazon, and it felt like it was in the right order, but But yeah, I wish I had never looked on IMDb because now it's just got me confused everywhere. But I feel like we watched it in the right order, and it was the way it was meant to be. So what did you think of the pilot?
I thought the pilot was very well done. It's one that drew you in. And even though it was long there, an hour and a half, it had plenty of action. So, of course, we start with the big war with our main character, played by Nathan Fillion right off the bat, Malcolm Reynolds. And then, of course, his leading lady, Gina Torres, Zoe Washburn. And they are rebel soldiers, otherwise known as browncoats, that are going up against this new formed power, this alliance. So Earth, essentially, at this point, has been used up of all of its resources. We had to leave, so the powers that be would be, of course, America and China in this particular series. And so they form a powerhouse together that comes up with the alliance.
Right.
And so, of course, all of the browncoats and soldiers and rebels get together. The alliance themselves form a couple of home planets, if you will, within the galaxy. And then there's a bunch of moons, all kinds of other terraformed Earths. And so people gather up and rise up, so to speak, against that. And so that's where we meet Malcolm Reynolds and Zoe Washburn. And then from there, we kind of fast forward a little bit to where they're soldiers turned smugglers. And so they're trying to just pick up a ragtag crew on this Firefly ship.
Uh-huh.
And that's where we're introduced to other marquee characters, such as Alan Tudyk as Hogan Washburn, or Wash, as they call him. And he's, I think, hands down one of my favorite characters of this entire series.
Oh yeah, mine too. And it really tripped me out because the chemistry of pretty much the whole crew was really good in the series. And I really liked his relationship with Zoe, and I felt like their chemistry was really, really good.
Oh yeah, they fed off of each other.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you first see them meet each other, it's like she says something to Malcolm, like they meet Wash, and he's like being considered to be their pilot, and then she's like, I hate him, I can't stand him.
Don't want him on the ship.
Right. And then like a little ways later, you see Malcolm going through the ship, and he like runs into him making out and stuff like that, and it's just funny because
and they wind up being married.
Right.
So
and now they've been married for a while, and their relationship with Malcolm really works, and it works well.
And they all have that understanding, that camaraderie, and they click for sure.
It's really in that pilot episode where we meet the main crew.
And of course, that main crew being Malcolm Reynolds, we've already mentioned, Zoe Washburn, Wash, aka Alan Tudyk, and then we also get introduced to two other key crew members in Jane Cobb, played by Adam Baldwin, not to be confused with the Baldwin brothers whatsoever.
Yeah, no.
And also the mechanic, the young Kaylee Fry, played by Jewel State. And so that's the main core crew of Firefly.
And they end up going to a planet to pick up a group of people to transport. And that's where we get introduced to a couple of the other main crew members for the entirety of the show.
Yeah, and with the other crew members, it's one where you're not really sure if they're going to be mainstays. They just get picked up. It's like, all right, well, who are these people? And of course, when we speak of who are, that's going to be such characters as Simon Tam, the Doctor, played by Sean Maher, and then we've got the Shepherd. I believe it's Shepherd Book, played by Ron Glass, and so those are some of the other supporting characters. And then the big surprise is that of River Tam. Of course, we don't really get to know much about her in this pilot, other than she's in kind of like a cryogenic state, and which is, of course, it's Western sci-fi, so it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
It still kind of looks weird there in that pilot episode.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see that, and you don't know what's going on, or if this guy is a good guy, because, I mean, he's holding a woman in a crate that nobody knows who she is or anything like that. Something happens on the ship to where I guess the Alliance gets word where they are, and so they figure out that there's a mole on the ship, and he's the first one that everybody goes to, thinking that he had something to do with it, and they ask him what's in the crate and all that. They end up pulling him off the crate and opening it, and they see the girl in the crate, and they're like, what's going on here? And it just kind of goes off from there. But she wakes up and jumps out of the crate, and he's trying to comfort her and let her know that she's safe, and he got her away from the people that were doing her harm and all this, which we'll learn more about later in the series. As of right now, all we find out is that it's his sister, and they're on the run, basically.
And then, of course, from there, we get introduced to one of the last main characters of the series, and that, of course, being Inara Sarah, who is a companion, you can't see my air quotes, but companion on the show, played by Morena Baccarin. This was one of her, actually, if I'm not mistaken, first big roles for a TV series or movie of any kind.
Yeah, I think it was. I did not remember that she was on this series until I watched it again, but obviously she's become a lot more popular in recent years. Of course, she was in both Deadpool movies as the love interest of Wade Wilson. But yeah, it's early in her career, and she's, yeah.
A companion.
Yeah,
that's the best way to describe it. When you watch the series, you'll understand.
Right. You can't really talk about what she does these days.
No, it's not suitable for work.
Right.
Or nerdy by nature.
Right. So
we try to keep it as clean and squeaky as possible. And so from there, really, like you said, the show takes off, and so they wind up going out into the frontier that is space, and they, of course, the main crew knows all along that they're smugglers and they take on jobs, but the passengers that they have with them are very unaware that they have signed on to be with these smugglers, and they're kind of a part of the package parcel deal. Sometimes they'll go out on missions with them, other times they'll just man the ship. We find out later that this Firefly unit also contains some pods that will go out and aid them. So, from here, what are some of your favorite episodes throughout the series?
Well, one of my favorite episodes was the pilot, just because it has one of the coolest scenes in it to me that really tells you what kind of person and what kind of captain Malcolm Reynolds is, and that he cares about his crew and what's going on. Obviously they've stopped to pick up this group of people, most of which become the main crew throughout the series, but there's one person that was a mole, and Malcolm does tell all the people that they picked up that they have to make a pit stop to do a job before they can take them to their final destination. And so while they're on this planet doing the job, the mole turns out to be this one character that was a cop of some sort. He's in law enforcement, and basically he's trying to find River, Tam, and the doctor to take River back to where she was being held captive. But the mole gets River in hand, and he's holding her hostage with a gun to her head, and her brother's got another gun on him, and they're just in a standstill. And all of a sudden it cuts back to Malcolm and Zoe, who are doing the job, and they realize that Reavers are coming, so they got to get back to the ship. Well, once they get to the ship, they go on to the ship, and Malcolm, without any hesitation or reason or anything, just pulls his gun and shoots the cop that's trying to get River. I mean, it's just out of nowhere, but I mean, it was warranted. The guy was not a good guy. He was trying to do something bad. So it just shows you that he's got a lot of other things on his mind, so he's going to take care of small situations quickly.
Yeah. And I think that was definitely one of those end scenes where it was like, I literally we don't have time to deal with this. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
see you later.
Didn't even ask any questions or anything. Just capped him in the head and moved when they went on.
And really from there, everybody else becomes a part of the crew, kind of like, part of the ship, part of the crew.
Basically.
And I don't know if they ever actually get to their destination. They go to a lot of destinations, but I don't think they ever get to their initial destination. We'll put that in air quotes again.
Right. I think they just kind of, like you said, they become part of the crew, part of the ship. But there's a point in the series where Malcolm tells the doctor, I need a doctor on the ship. We can keep y'all safe. And so they kind of become part of the crew just in that agreement. And then the shepherd, he's just tagging along, but he gets to know everybody, and he's a preacher, basically. So he wants to take care of everybody and steer them in the right way. He decides to stay with them as well. So.
And he has some integral parts as well. There are a few episodes where we find out that, while he is this man of faith, he still knows how to handle a weapon, and he also knows how to talk his way out of a few tight spots, which he does in a few episodes on behalf of the crew. So they all kind of become more or less kind of like a family at the end of the day. One of my favorite episodes, just to fast forward a few, was episode 8 or so, called Out of Gas. And it was a very touching episode in a number of ways. So I'm a big backstory guy, as you know, Charlie Mythos.
Right.
And so in this one, if you had any questions up until this point of where did these people come from? How did they all come together? How did they all get onto the Firefly ship at one point or another? And of course in the pilot we see where everybody gets on the ship, but as far as the main crew, you really get that backstory to see how they came across each individual and how they melded with the crew. And it's fast forwards and does a lot of flashing back and forth in between how it was and where they're at now.
Right.
And again, you just see this Malcolm Reynolds character, played by Fillion, who really not only loves the ship, but has an appreciation and understanding that he's the captain, he's going to go down with his ship, and that it shouldn't be a situation where anybody else's lives are jeopardized at that point.
Right.
And so essentially what happens is, of course, the Firefly runs literally out of gas, out of fumes. Dangerous situation. They have to jettison that all into deep space to avoid the ship blowing up. And then to expand upon that, to make matters worse, the ship is then, of course, losing oxygen. It's becoming colder. It's just not inhabitable for anyone to be on the ship at that point.
Right.
He sends everybody out, and he's essentially there by himself to go down with the ship.
Basically, yeah. He pushes them off on the life rafts, basically.
More or less, they're kind of like escape pods.
Escape pods.
But they can hold multiple people.
Right, and he tells them, go and find whoever you can, but he doesn't expect for them to come back.
No,
obviously.
not at all.
I mean, you can tell that he's pretty sure that he's not going to make it through. But I agree, that was a really good episode. And during the whole thing, while he's kind of running out of air, and you see him going through the ship, trying to figure out what's wrong, and he's trying to fix it, you get backstory about him and Zoe, and when they first find the Firefly, and when they first buy it, and decide to do this, then you get the backstory between her and Wash, and how they met when they hired him to be the pilot. So yeah, I really enjoyed that episode as well.
I think the most interesting backstory for me was that of Kaylee the mechanic, because up until that point, most viewers looked at her as kind of just this innocent, happy-go-lucky mechanic that's just glad to be on the ship. And we get to find out quite quickly that she's not quite as innocent as we thought she was, rather promiscuous in a certain scene,
Yeah.
but still spunky and just full of that mechanical knowledge. And that's where the captain says, well, hey, if you need a job, we need a mechanic.
Well, it's hilarious because they've already got a mechanic,
right?
And he's not really doing what he's supposed to do, and he's brought her on the ship, and they're like making out, and Malcolm comes in to ask the guy mechanic what's wrong and has he fixed it yet, and he hasn't fixed it, and then we find out that he doesn't really know as much as he's letting on, and she fixes it right there in front of him.
Right.
And it's just a funny thing because you realize that she knows a whole lot more than this guy does. And so Malcolm basically just right then and there fires him and hires her, and she becomes part of the main crew. And it's a really good introduction. It's funny, and it tells you a lot about the character.
Especially the line where the guy mechanic says, you don't need two mechanics, and Malcolm says, I agree.
Right. Yeah, that was funny. I forgot about that.
Cracking me up. And another one that I liked, speaking of backstory, was the episode titled Safe. And that's a few episodes before Out of Gas, and that's where we really get a good look into River Tam and Simon Tam, so the Tam's household,
right,
as them as children, and we get to see her becoming this child prodigy. Which is funny because Sam is a doctor, but then even still, River is just leaps and bounds ahead.
Yeah, and he even acknowledges that several times throughout the series. I like their relationship because it is strictly brother and sister. I'm gonna take care of you, and you're gonna take care of me.
Right.
From the beginning to the very end. You can tell that they really care about each other. They had good chemistry. I mean, everybody did in the show, but just certain relationships, you can tell they really bonded and became close in the show.
They did, and in this episode in particular, the one that we're talking about, Safe, you get that moment there when they go to that little rinky-dink mom-and-pop town, and River kind of has that epiphany of, you've been doing this for a long time, you've been taking care of me, you were the one that broke me out from the Alliance, because of course, up until this point, we haven't really expanded upon what River's abilities and situation is. She comes off as kind of the kooky, not all quite there character on the ship, kind of a loose cannon personality of what's she going to do next, what's wrong with her, is she dealing with multiple personality disorder, what's going on upstairs. And so we really get more of a backstory and find out that she was going under some kind of experiment with the Alliance. She was a part of a special gifted program of students.
Right, and it's even kind of alluded to in that episode where we meet their parents, and when they were younger, they send her to this special program, and so you don't realize it, but throughout his life, he keeps in touch with her, and as they grow up, she starts sending him messages in code, and he even tries to tell his parents that, and they act like he's crazy and silly, that she's just playing games like she's always done, and he knows that there's more to her than meets the eye, basically, and we find out that it's not good what she's going through, where she is. It doesn't turn out to be a special program. They're doing bad things to her, and her brother finds out and tries to go to the parents, and they just don't believe him. I don't want to say that it's understandable, their reaction, but I mean, if you look at it at a very surface level, I mean, they're parents, and these are their two kids, and who knows how long they've been pretending to talk in code or playing games. Could have been very innocent in their non-belief of it. You know what I mean?
Could have been, but to your point, I think you also get that notion that they are kind of a upper echelon, high-class household.
Right.
And so I think mommy and daddy might have those big CEO or COO jobs where they, I don't want to say don't have time to piddle around with child matters, but they really don't seem as concerned as you would think a parent should be.
That is true, and they do. I can't remember what episode it was, but there is a point where he does something. I don't know if it was when he tries to break her out or like what he does, but he gets arrested, and his father comes and bails him out, basically, and tells him, I'm not going to keep doing this. If you continue on this path, you're doing it alone, because I have a reputation, basically, and...
Right, and he reminds him that he has a reputation as well to become a successful doctor.
Right. It's weird, the relationship, basically. I mean, it's pretty common of those kinds of relationships you see. I mean, like, it's a very stereotypical. The parents are rich and wealthy and powerful, and they want their kids to continue that, and their kids do something that they don't like, and they throw them to the wind. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you see it a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So, like, oh, okay, we've seen this play out before, and we know how it ends.
Right.
And to piggyback off of that, we go into an episode called Ariel, where he actually is able to infiltrate an Alliance hospital, which is a pretty dangerous move at this point in the show, because they are hot on Firefly's trail. That's why they keep picking up some jobs that are a little more outer rim planets, so they can try to avoid the Alliance, but they have to go to a central planet for this hospital, and essentially they're trying to get all kinds of medications and
for the crew, and
for the crew, and then also to sell on the black market, because let's be real, they are smugglers.
True.
At the end of the day. But ultimately, Simon does this to try to get River into the hospital to see what kind of testing they did, to figure out what's going on upstairs. 'Cause to that point, they don't really know.
Right.
And this is a moment where we see the character Jane Cobb kind of take a little bit of a twist. Because up until that point, he's not really been on board with them being on the ship in any realm.
You're right.
And we see him try to turn them over for good reason. I should go ahead and preface with, in this particular episode, River has a moment where she kind of spaces out, takes a knife, and slashes across Jane's chest. So, I mean, if someone came at me with a knife and I knew they were a fugitive, I might consider turning them in, or if I already didn't want them to be on the ship, that would be plenty of incentive to get them off of the ship. So I see where he's coming from, but also it's one of those where they had this mission set up, and he essentially made his own side mission with the Alliance to try and get a big payday, and it blows up in his face.
Obviously, I mean, it always does for characters like that.
In those types of these grand ideas of, oh yeah, I'm going to get rich quick and this will work.
Right.
It never happens that way. But we find out from Simon doing some pretty cool CGI graphic brain testing on River that they removed her amygdala.
Right.
And of course, we're not scientists or doctors, but to the best of our knowledge, the amygdala is a part of the brain that helps you handle emotions.
Right.
And so when you've removed that, of course, Simon's character says, well, oh my gosh, she basically feels everything all the time. No wonder she's always out of sorts, or one moment she might be happy, the next moment she might be manic depressive. So
right, and that was a very good way of explaining her nature and the way she was about different things, and how she handles things, basically.
Right.
That gave a good explanation. And I know you're not a big fan of Jane.
Not really, at the end of the day. I mean, could have dealt without his character, to be honest.
Right, and I'm not that big a fan of him either, but he's basically you see it a lot in a lot of movies and shows. He's the one that's, in it for the money, and not because he cares about anybody, but...
Right, he's the man's character.
Right, and which you do kind of feel, or at least I felt like you find out that he does care more than he lets on, because obviously him trying to turn them over to the Alliance doesn't work out, and the Alliance tries to jail all of them, and Malcolm and Zoe go in and basically get them out in that episode. And so when they all get through it and get out of the issues and everything and get back on the Firefly, you realize that nobody knew about Jane turning her over or turning them over or anything like that, except you realize that once they get back on the ship, Malcolm knew that he was going to do that. And so they all, say they're, woo, we made it, we did it, everything's great. And then they all leave and go back up into the ship. And Malcolm tells Jamie to hold on a minute. We need to have a talk. And basically he puts him out in the airlock and closes the door and tells him, I hate that you did this, but you turned on us and you're done. And in my opinion, I felt like Jane had a moment where he was about to die. He accepted that he was about to die. And he tells Malcolm not to tell the rest of the crew what he did. Don't tell him what he did because he cares about them and he doesn't want them to know what he did to them. That's how I took it. And it was a little bit of a redeeming factor to him. And then as soon as he says that, Malcolm opens the door back up because he sees that this guy really does care about the crew. That's the way I read it.
I could see that. I'll allow it.
And of course, after that happens, Malcolm makes it very clear to him that he is not going to cross them again. He will kill him if he turns on them again.
Yeah, and that's just a recurring theme episode to episode is that, hey, if you're a part of my ship, you're a part of my crew, and therefore you are essentially a family member. And family members don't stab each other in the back or turn their backs on one another or leave anybody behind.
Right.
And speaking of leaving people behind, one episode that we have to talk about is the one that, of course, we mentioned the sporadic way that these episodes were released. They were completely out of continuity.
And actually, 1 second, sorry.
Sure,
going back to that, when the doctor is doing the scan on River and telling him what happened and what they did to him, you can actually see in that point that Jane changes his mind.
He starts to care a little bit more and understand
and
their
realizes
situation.
What they went through and what she went through. And he tries to go back on it and says, we need to get out of here and leave. Just throwing that out there.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point to make, for sure.
But, I mean, the rest of the time, he's pretty loyal to the crew. After all that happens, he's still that annoying guy that cares about money and doesn't act like he cares about anybody else.
There's one in every crew.
Right. But to me, that solidified his place in the crew.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good. That's a solid point to make. I like it. But so, of course, we had talked about No Man Left Behind, and of course, an episode that I feel like we have to talk about, like I said, is The Message. And of course, that's one that, the best of our knowledge, with the out of continuity release of these episodes, ended up being the series finale episode,
that was
which
weird.
is totally weird because when you watch The Message, and for those of you listening, if you've watched it, you know where we're going with this. For those of you that haven't, when you do, you'll see what we mean.
Right.
I get that the ending of that particular, so the episode itself is where Mal and Zoe end up, I can't remember exactly what planet they're on, but
they go to some planet where I guess they go and check their mail, basically.
More or less, right?
Every character on there, like, they go to this planet and they're all seeing if they've been sent anything from people.
And boy, do they get a surprise package.
Right.
Because it's one of their previous soldier, I don't want to say soldier mates, but men in arms or brother in arms, if you want to call it that. And he is in a crate that looks more or less like a coffin. And to the best of everyone's knowledge, he's already passed on. He leaves a message on a recorder.
Right.
And so they play, it's a very heartfelt message, and the episode goes along, and it turns out that, surprise, he's actually not dead at all. He's been faking his death this whole time to avoid the Alliance and others there in the police force. And so it's the heat is on. They're trying to get him back to his home planet. Of course, he's got cops on his trail trying to get him because he's, stowing away harvested organs.
Yeah, like, that was crazy.
Which was, from a sci-fi standpoint, I was like, I get it, but I did not see that coming.
Right, yeah, that was weird. I'll just say it flat out. They basically removed everything of his and put in all these stolen organs, black market organs and stuff in his body.
Right, with the promise of replacing his organs.
Right,
after the deal was done.
Yeah.
Which is sounds like a terrible pitch to begin with. I feel like you'd have to be in a pretty low point in the galaxy to want to do that for fast cash.
Right.
Which his character ultimately admits to towards the end of the episode. Like,
exactly.
I hit a rough patch, I got low, made stupid choices, and so he actually, ironically enough, ends up passing away say
Right.
in the very end. But for that to be the quote-unquote end of this original air, I mean, no wonder people were either turned off by it or just left very confused as to, like, what? How? Okay, what can we expect for season 2? What?
Right, yeah, it didn't look, well, I mean, obviously nobody was expecting season 2, because didn't you say they announced
They actually did announce the cancellation in December 2002.
like in the middle of the first season.
Right.
So I mean, even then, that's kind of odd that that last episode got released as the last episode after they knew it was being canceled. So it wasn't like they were like, we got to try and fix this or try and tie these loose ends up and end it before it's over. You know, I mean, like, you hear about that with new shows that get canceled, much like the Swamp Thing show that was canceled.
A very similar path, and I think it's, a lot to do with, again, like we said earlier in the top of the show, the mishandling by Fox. They had them in kind of what's known as the Dead Zone, or a Friday night showing. Of course, most people on a Friday night, that's either going to be a payday, or you're going out on the town, or you're visiting family somewhere, you're going out on vacation. Odds are you're probably just not going to be watching any type of television.
It's weird. I've read that in the past, that when networks are getting ready to cancel shows or end shows, they generally move them off of their heavier nights and move them to Friday nights. And that's generally, like, I've read that's generally how you can tell that something's about to end, or something.
Right.
Things aren't looking good for this particular show, because nobody stays home to watch TV on Friday nights. They go out, they do things. So it stands to reason that you're going to move a show that you don't really care about the ratings or the viewership anymore to that day,
Absolutely. And I feel like it's important to mention that, given the timing of this particular show, it was something that we hadn't necessarily seen before. In 2002, it was a highly original show, and the ideas and the concepts in this show, some of them can be, I guess, semi-thought-provoking. I don't want to say that it was a deep show by any means, but still, it was one that really did make you think, and again, it's one of those that just was ahead of its time, I'll say that, because when I was watching this show for myself the first time through, I thought to myself, man, if this were pitched to HBO or Hulu or Netflix today, people would gobble it up in a heartbeat, make it an hour-long episode, and string it out for as long as they could, kind of like a Westworld or what have you, or a Doctor Who.
Yeah, basically, I would agree with that. And I mean, at the time that it was on back in 2002, 2003, I didn't watch it then. I didn't know anything about it then, obviously. But I was a lot younger then, too. But I've just since heard of it and heard that it's like the number one, show that anybody that has interest in sci-fi and all of that world say it's such an underrated show, and wish that it had never been canceled. And so when I originally watched it, it was on Netflix, and I watched it there, and I really loved it, but it wasn't. I can understand where somebody else might watch it and think, especially today with the other content that's available.
Oh yeah.
Watching it now, going back and watching it, it wasn't where TV is today. Let's just say that.
No, not quite. And it's one of those where I think the viewer was still expected to invest, because there are some episodes, even though they're all only 45 minutes, it feels much longer.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of setup, and it could be one of those. It's very easy to have Firefly essentially be background noise at times if you're not fully invested in that episode.
Yeah.
And there are some lull episodes.
Right.
But I think it picks up from episodes 8 all the way through to the series finale, which the finale, I think it's a good point to talk about this and segue into the Serenity movie. So the series finale was really well done, and I just liked the way that, now this is of course the actual continuity series finale that we're talking about, just to not confuse anyone.
Right.
And that was Objects in Space, and this is where we really see everyone come to their full tilt of their character arc. I guess you could say character arc for the first season, or well, the only season.
Yeah.
And it was just so well done. You got to see the best of everybody, and a surprisingly new character that stole the show as it ended.
Yeah, basically, a bounty hunter by by the name of Virgil Early ends up coming aboard the spaceship, and they don't even know it or realize that he's there. And he basically takes everybody out, gets them in their rooms, and locks them in. And he's a very interesting character, but you can tell that he's not a good guy at all.
No.
Like, just from the way he talks to Kaylee, he ends up seeing her first and getting seen by her first and talks to her, and the things he says is just it's a lot rougher than I remembered. And then later on in the episode, you get hints at his backstory, and it sounds like a very disturbing, like, this guy's gonna turn into a serial killer type of backstory.
Oh yeah, he ends up being kind of the boogeyman. Like, he's somebody that you do not want anywhere near or on your ship, let alone.
Right.
For sure. And a scene that I really enjoyed, but I had to really kind of put myself in the mind space to enjoy it, was when River had the voiceover on the ship and was acting like she had become a part of Firefly. And I had that moment where I was like, well, no, wait a minute. You know, we've been hinted at that she's had, like, maybe these psychic abilities. Or like, is she in everyone's head and she's projecting her voice? And then I thought, well, surely there's no way that she did, like, a Terminator T2 and melted and, like, became a part of the ship all of a sudden. That's way too much for, you know, the viewer to just accept in a series finale. I was like, so there's got to be something going on here. And we wind up finding out that she's actually on his ship.
Yeah, that was funny.
And so that twist, I just thought that was great.
Right, and she was basically coming up with all the stuff that she was saying based on everything she found in his ship and writings and stuff that he's written about, and he realizes at one point that she knows more than she should, and then he figures out that she's on his ship.
Right.
And she tells him, okay, come back to your ship and I'll go with you. And the whole crew is like, what? No, we're not giving you up. You know, it's a touching moment and everything. And then, obviously, we find out that it was not real and that Malcolm was working with her. And he's outside the ship waiting on Virgil, and ends up, as soon as Virgil comes out of the ship and he's standing on the outside of the ship, he turns around and Malcolm's there, and Malcolm just knocks him off, and that's the end of Virgil.
Right.
Or so we think for a minute.
So we think for a minute, anyway. And there's a moment even before all of that I really appreciated too, that I wanted to point out, and that is when River is kind of walking around the ship before Virgil really takes hold of it, and she's kind of going through and feeling all of the emotions that everyone's having in different portions of the ship. So of course there's that nice intimate scene with Simon and Kaylee on the couch. She feels their happiness, and you see her smile for a moment. She sees her brother happy, then she moves on, and she sees both Shepard and Jane having a conversation, somewhat heated but somewhat joking, and so she gets kind of both of that comedy and anger in the same realm.
Right.
And then she moves on to, of course, the married couple, the Washburns. You know, they're having an intimate moment, a little more so than Kaylee and Simon.
Right.
And she kind of feels that intimacy. And then about that moment, that's when Virgil takes over. But so we flash forward to where Malcolm essentially boots him into deep space, the great beyond. And that's kind of the end of the show. We essentially see him floating, twisting away, and the last thing we hear is him saying, well, here I go.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, he floats off into space, and we don't know we're assuming he died. I mean, they're out in the middle of nowhere, nothing around them.
Right.
They even jettisoned his ship off in one direction and him off in another direction. So
unless someone maybe came upon him,
right,
picked him up, perhaps, but we don't know. We'll never know it.
Right. Of course, that's the end of the show. So
in the series finale.
Right.
Yeah.
But
one season coming to a head there.
Exactly, and I will say that I know that there was such an outcry of love for this show after it was canceled, that people really wanted it back, and they did try to bring it back. Like, they were wanting to bring it back to TV a couple of times, and it just never got anywhere. And then finally they were able to get together and make a movie happen. And so they made the movie. It's called Serenity. It came out in 2005, and it's a full-blown movie that was released and everything. And they made it for the fans of the show, because they said they wanted to put an ending to the show, because there was no real ending to the show. It didn't ever feel like it ended.
No, there's so many questions still left unanswered.
Right.
Absolutely. What happens to River? What happens to the rest of the crew? Do Simon and Kaylee end up ever being a thing?
Right.
Do, Malcolm and Inara ever end up being an item? Because there was definitely some romantic tension throughout.
Oh yeah, throughout the whole
throughout
series. Yeah. So I mean, they were able to finally get it done, and you can tell that it was a huge step up from the show as far as special effects and budget and all that kind of stuff goes.
Oh yeah.
But I think they did a really good job. Like, they didn't wait too long to where it made it feel like, no, these don't feel like the same characters anymore. Like, these actors have moved on and done other things. Like, it was at most, I think, like 2 years after.
Right. The film came out in 2005 by Universal Studios.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was a couple of years afterwards, and they had the exact same cast and crew come back.
Right.
So there was no, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't River, that wasn't Simon.
Right.
So it was all the same people.
It was all the same actors. And
they tied up a lot of loose ends. There were still a couple of unanswered questions in the very end of the film, but throughout they did a good job of showing how Simon and River escaped the clutches of the Alliance, and then they also, of course, tied in some relationship gaps, and we finally eventually get to see, towards the end, Simon and Kaylee finally become an item, so it's a nice awe moment.
Yeah.
And we also really get to know about characters that we were unfamiliar with or unaware of throughout most of the series, and that's the Reavers. We heard about them. We knew, at least to an extent, that they were a type of race of people that you didn't want to mess with and were bad news.
Yeah.
Just when you heard their name, it invoked fear, and you better get out of wherever you're at, wherever they are.
They were basically no longer men, they were animals, and it was just people that had gone crazy living in space for so long, and so they just went animalistic, and yeah, you find out a lot more about them, and it felt like the show. I mean, it just felt like you were continuing watching the show, except you could tell a big jump in budget, obviously, and special effects. But I mean, it was entertaining, and everybody was the way they were. Obviously, you saw everybody, but there were some changes from when the show ended to when the movie starts. Basically, Inara was not part of the ship anymore. Book Shepard, he had left the crew to go to this planet called Haven, where he went to basically be a minister and missionary and take care of these people that were on this planet. And you come to find out that that's one of the places, whenever Firefly's in trouble or anything, that's where they go to Shepard and seek refuge, and he helps keep them safe. So I mean, it was a really good movie. I really enjoyed it, and like I said, it felt a lot like the show, and it wasn't like a too big of a jump in time span where anybody looked too different. Everybody looked about the same, and it felt like the same show.
Oh, for sure. And we also got a little bit of a treat in the way of actor Chiwetel Ejiofor, also known as Baron Mordo from Doctor Strange, was the main antagonist in this film, and I think he really did a great job. And we had talked about this before the podcast, Charlie. You made a great point that he was essentially Malcolm Reynolds' equal in combat and in strategy, being one step ahead. Of course, our crew was always 2 steps ahead of everybody else, which was fun to watch, but still, he just did a bang-up job in this one from start to finish, I thought.
Oh yeah, I mean, and there were several times in the movie and in the fight sequences between him and Malcolm where you think, oh, this is not looking good for Malcolm, but obviously Malcolm being the good guy, he's gonna pull through. I mean, and they did a really good job of using, I guess, the operative is who Chiwetel Ejiofor is playing. His expertise in fighting and the way he fights was really cool to see Malcolm counter it and know what he was going to do some of the time before he did it. And on both of their parts, it really felt like that. And just, obviously, it was just a really cool...
Oh yeah, the back and forth between them throughout the movie was definitely fun to watch. And of course, we also, unfortunately, got some sad surprises in this film as well. Moments that we didn't really see coming or foresaw coming, and that, of course, being one of the first character losses in Shepard. Very sad scene. They go back to the planet to see if he's all right, and unfortunately, they are definitely not all right.
Well, yeah, they go back to the planet just for the same reason they normally go to that planet, for refuge and everything. And when they get to it, they see that it's been torn to shreds and everything's looking bad, and then you realize the operative basically decides, well, if this guy's got these different places he goes to, he's gonna check everybody that he's ever worked with and just kill him. And he says something in when they first see him after they realize that he's destroyed all of these planets and refuges that Malcolm has around the galaxy. He comes across the computer and sees that they're all dead, and then he gets the message from the operative, and he's talking to him, and he says, what is it? When you run aground, or when one's run aground, make sure there's no ground to run to, or something like that.
Something along those lines. And he also, just throws back in his face, like, hey, you should have taken my deal. All I was asking for was River. If you would have given her back to the Alliance, you could have went on your way. None of this had to happen. But of course, as we know, that's not the way that Malcolm Reynolds does business.
Of course.
So, and by that point, though, he is visually very rocked, and they know, of course, before that, we see a pretty cool action scene in a bar where River kind of goes off the handle, says the name, or at least what we think is the name, Miranda,
right,
and goes into a big action scene and pretty much takes out everybody in the bar, including Jane. That was kind of one of those also is action but also comedic relief, because she beats him up pretty good, and I don't think he was expecting it.
No, he wasn't, but that was not to be the champion of Jane or anything, but that was another part that really showed that he cared, because he was holding her, trying to get her to stop fighting and everything, and she starts fighting him, and he never once lays a hand on her or tries to fight back.
No, and I will say, in the movie, I definitely liked the way that they kind of redeemed Jane's character, so to speak. For me, I was like, okay, I can actually kind of accept this guy and deal with this guy at this point.
Right. No, I understand.
But then, from there, of course, we go back to that visually rocked scene with Malcolm Reynolds, and all of their hideouts are being burned to the ground, the members of which along with it. Right. At that point, I feel like he finally just kind of snaps and says, okay, you know what? This guy wants to play hardball. We're going to play hardball too. And they take those that have passed on, and they know where they have to go. They start doing some research on the ship and looking into, what does... River has to know something that the Alliance doesn't want her to know, being a quote-unquote psychic or person with special abilities.
And part of something that was really cool to me, how they did it, was that what sets her off in the bar is an ad, basically, on TV, and there's like an embedded subliminal message, and the Alliance actually put that out and had it playing everywhere, so that once they heard that this person went crazy and beat up a whole place, they would know that was her and where to find her. I thought that was really interesting, because they knew that it would get back to the Alliance that this crazy person went crazy and just slaughtered everybody in this bar, or I don't think she slaughtered anybody, she just basically fought them.
She beat him up pretty well.
Right, but I mean, I thought that was really weird and really a good idea, but it was also just telling how messed up the people that were running this really were.
The Alliance was reminiscent of the Big Brother in a lot of ways. They're always watching.
And like you said before the podcast, that it was very reminiscent to the Alliance as the Empire and them as the rebels in Star Wars.
Right. Which, speaking of which, if you haven't listened to our Star Wars synopsis, feel free and go back and check that one out.
Yeah.
We would appreciate it. It's the episode before this one.
Yeah, very last one. Right there on the list.
Not hard to miss.
No.
But I tell you, speaking of hard, I mean, it was so hard we mentioned sad surprises a moment ago. So, of course, Malcolm gets, lets the bodies and repaints the ship to make it look like a Reaver ship so that they can make it through this Reaver patch to get to the planet of Miranda. We find out that Miranda is not necessarily a person. It's
not a person, and it's a planet, and the Reavers, it's so far out that the Reavers, which we come to find out why they populate around this planet, but they basically hang out in the empty space between that planet and Haven, basically. And so they decide they're going to this planet, and they realize that all these Reavers are there. And after Shepard gets killed, you see Malcolm go crazy, basically, and kind of just finally lose it. And he starts telling them, do all this stuff to the ship. We've got all these dead bodies, so I want you to take these dead bodies and mount them all over the ship and paint the ship red so it looks like it's got blood all over it, because that's one one of the signs of a Reaver ship, basically.
Right.
And so they leave to go to Miranda, and they have to go through the Reavers. And it's a very tense moment because you hear, like when they're going through it, they have the radio playing, and they're all being really quiet in the ship, but you hear over the radio all the Reavers around them just screaming, and
Oh yeah.
and basically you hear death and hell all around them.
And destruction.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But they know it's the only way they can go.
Right.
And they end up making it through, and so they get onto the planet of Miranda, and they notice that the atmosphere is perfectly fine. The air is breathable. Oxygen is safe. That's a scene that that I had a little bit of a problem with, only because from a survival standpoint, of course, Zoe is like, yeah, Mal, it seems like the oxygen levels are good. The gravity is
basically like Earth, yeah.
Essentially Earth 2.0,
but these could be wrong.
Right, and I don't know. And at that point, Mal takes off his helmet, just goes for it, and then for me, I was like, oh boy, I don't know if I would have been that bold or that brave. I
can understand your thoughts on that, but that's really a common thing in these kinds of movies where they go to these planets. There's always going to be that guy that's like, well, screw it, and takes off his mask to see what happens. And I think that Mal was just at that point where he'd lost everything basically, and they're trying to do this. They're trying to get to the final place that they think they can hide or whatever from the Alliance, and everything that's happened, I think he was just to the point where he was like, he didn't care.
Right.
If he dies, he dies.
He's like, let's go, let's figure this out and get this taken care of. Why are we here? And so they eventually find a beacon that's giving off some sort of power source, and they find out very quickly that they are very much alone on the planet, but they are still surrounded by those that used to inhabit the planet, and they find that out in probably the creepiest way possible, with a bunch of corpses essentially just splayed out across the planet as a whole, whether it's in an office or in the streets or what have you. And they wonder, well, what happened to these people? And so they go into this beacon that ends up being, I guess, like an old storage ship, more or less, or like research and rescue.
Well, I think it was like a laboratory,
right.
Like where these scientists were trying to figure out how they can terraform different planets, and somehow they came up with some kind of chemical or something that was supposed to hit the population and make them a lot less, I don't know if it was supposed to help them breathe the air on the planets, or if it was supposed to keep the rebels from fighting back, or what it was, but it was basically, it subdued a certain portion of the population to the point
sort of
where
like a chill pill for everybody.
Right, to the point where they just didn't care about anything and they quit altogether. They quit living, they quit talking, they quit eating, and they just basically wasted away. And then we find out that the other percentage of the population, it hits them a different way, and they become crazy and
much more aggressive,
animalistic, and we come to find that that's how the Reavers were created, basically.
Fortunately, in addition to becoming animalistic, they also become very cannibalistic.
Yeah.
Which is a really creepy scene to watch, because you can tell that something bad's about to happen in this. They find a message, essentially, from the doctor that created this particular air atmospheric substance, and she's essentially having an epiphany and letting people know, like, hey, we were just trying to do the right thing, but the world and this galaxy needs to know what happened.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with this planet, there's no war, there's no need for any of this. This is a perfectly inhabitable planet now.
Right.
We were just trying our best. And so at that point, the Firefly crew knows. And of course, she gets taken out by a Reaver there in the end. And of course, Jane's like, hey, turn that off. I don't want to watch any more of this.
Right.
And who would?
And obviously, that's going back to the Reavers. That was kind of gives reason to why they populate around this planet, is because that's where they were created. And you realize that the Alliance was behind all of this. So you realize that that's why they didn't want the girl out, because they knew that she would find out somehow. And they were afraid that she would get it out to everybody. So Malcolm decides that they need to, come hell or high water, the last thing they need to do is get that message out to the galaxy and let everybody know what happened, how things came to be the way they are.
Right. And so, of course, they wind up making their way back to their friend Mr. Universe, who essentially, I guess, operates much in the way of a master communicator amongst multiple different terraformed planets. And so he's the guy, if anyone's going to get this message out, it's going to be Mr. Universe. So they make it back to his planet where he's housed. But unfortunately, unfortunately, he's a little too late. They crash land. Reavers hot right on their tail, along with some of the Alliance members, and of course the operative as well. He's not going anywhere. He's got to stop them and get River at any cost.
Right.
And that's where we get the saddest scene for me, anyway. And that's where, of course, they crash land. Wash drops that iconic line, and the Reavers end up shooting right through the building, right through the ship, and unfortunately, right through Wash.
Right, and going back to them taking off from Miranda to head back to where Mr. Universe is, you realize that it was all part of the plan, or all part of Malcolm's plan. They go back through the Reavers, and this time they're still trying to carefully go through so they don't get caught, but at the very end of going through them, they shoot one of the Reaver airships down, and you realize that they're trying to get the Reavers to follow them.
Oh, yeah, on purpose.
Because they know that there's a good chance that the Alliance and the operative is waiting at the planet that the Mr. Universe is on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come into the atmosphere. Like while they're going, they come into the atmosphere and the operative is there in the Alliance ship waiting on them. He sees them coming and he's like, we've got them. This is it. And they're not even changing course, so we've got them. And then all of a sudden you see the
whole Reaver house.
Yeah, the whole Reaver crew behind them, and they're flying and they pass the Alliance ship. And honestly, that whole scene with Wash flying the ship through all of that was awesome. And he does give that, it's become a really popular line amongst people that like this show and talk about this show. He says, I guess to keep himself calm while he's flying and everything, he basically gives the line, I'm a leaf on the wind, watch me soar. And he flies through and he makes it through everybody, and it's just a really cool line. And of course Malcolm's like, what the hell are you talking about?
He's like, just go with it.
And so they make it through, but obviously it doesn't work out so well. They crash land on Mr. Universe's planet, and then unfortunately one of the Reavers does follow them all the way, and you think that everybody's good, and then they shoot through the front of the ship, and the first shot hits Wash, and it's just, I hated that was the way he went out. I wish he had made it through that. That was the only thing, really, in the whole movie that I was like, no.
Right.
Because it was just so out of nowhere, basically. I mean, it was meant to be a gut punch and a freak moment, but I mean, it sucked. Because he was truly one of the best characters.
Oh, a fan favorite for sure. And in a lot of respects carried some of the episodes with his comedic relief, and was just a witty, fun character throughout. And a really unfortunate part for the characters in that scene, they had no time to grieve or mourn. They had to just keep going.
Right.
Because the Reavers were still hot on their trail, the operative was still at play, and they still had to get that message out.
Right.
Which, of course, that leads into a great couple of action scenes there where the Firefly crew holds down the fort that they build, essentially.
Yeah, they basically hold back the Reavers while Malcolm goes to Mr. Universe. And of course Malcolm gets to the room where Mr. Universe is, and he sees that he's down and all of his computers have been destroyed, and you think, man, this is not going to work out the way that it should. And in a real somber note, all of a sudden Mr. Universe has a robot wife, basically, and before he dies he records a message for Malcolm through the robot wife, and she turns on when Malcolm passes her, and she gives the message, and he tells him that he has a backup system and it's hard to get to, but it's down below with the actual generator for the planet, I guess, or for that whole compound.
Hard to get to is an understatement.
Oh yeah, but obviously, so Malcolm gets that message and he goes, and then a few minutes later you see the operative drop in to that same room, and you realize that he escaped the ship that was being attacked by the Reavers and made it down to the planet. And when he passes the robot wife, obviously it's just done by some kind of motion capture or motion alert, but the message plays again, so he knows where Malcolm is, and he goes after him.
And then they duke it out, and of course Malcolm winds up getting the best of him, and being the good guy that he is, he has that moment where he could have essentially killed the operative, but chooses not to, spares him, and realizes, no, you know what, I'm going to have you watch what everybody else is going to watch, and that's the truth.
Right.
And so the truth has its day, and fortunately, you think for a second, there's that hot moment where the Dr. Simon actually catches a stray bullet to the chest, and so you think, oh my gosh, we're going to lose somebody else. And
well, it looks like we're going to lose several of them because Kaylee gets hit by some kind of Reaver poison bullet as well.
Right. And then River sacrifices herself, or so it seems. And they can't quite close themselves off there in the vault, and so she goes through the hole, closes it off, and then gets into her weaponized state from the Alliance training and takes out all of the Reapers. Not just some of them, but all of them.
Right, and while it's happening, you don't realize that she's going to make it through.
No.
But cutting back to Malcolm and the operative, though, I just wanted to mention one really cool thing was when you first meet the operative at the beginning of the movie, he does this move where he like stabs this guy with his hand in his back and like hits some kind of nerves to where it like paralyzes the guy.
Right, partial paralysis.
Right,
yep.
Where the guy is going to fall over. And when him and Malcolm first meet and they are fighting and you don't think it's going to go Malcolm's way at first, he does that same move, and when you first watch it you don't realize it, but Malcolm acts like it's doing the same thing to him, but you can see his hand wiggle a little bit, like he still got motion. And when the operative goes in for the kill on Malcolm turns around and just, I mean, he almost kills him. I mean,
comes close.
He basically punches him in the throat so he can't breathe or talk, and then he does this move where he grabs the operative from behind and like breaks both of his arms or his spine or something, and basically just completely disables the operative. And that's when he's telling him, you know, I could have killed you, and he tells him also that, oh, back in my first tour in the war, I got a shrapnel hit and it took out those nerves on my back, so that move does nothing, basically. And so it was just a really cool moment where they went back to that original move that the operative does on that one guy to doing it on him, and it doesn't work on Malcolm.
Right, it was smooth, which I suppose some people might argue that that's awfully convenient, but regardless, it's still a cool scenario.
There's always going to be convenient things for the good guys in these movies, you know, I mean, it's just the way of movies, honestly.
At least for Firefly and Serenity.
Right.
For sure. And then from there, really, it kind of winds down, and of course, once the message gets out, there's still the Alliance hot on the trail of the Firefly crew, but the operative, they say, we're waiting for the command. Should we take him out? We've got him right here in our sights. This is what, been ordered to do. And he says, stand down. It's over.
Yeah.
Our job is done here.
Finally, the operative gets his motion or his voice back after being knocked in the throat, and he finally is able to tell him to stand down because he realizes that Malcolm could have killed him and he didn't. And he saw the message that exposed everything and saw that it was out, so there was no point in continuing his mission, basically. So,
and at that point, they really all get back on Firefly. They put those that they love to rest and give them the proper burial and a send-off, and then they send themselves off back out into the great beyond that is this world.
Yeah.
And at that point, of course, we get to see the final couple moments of Kaylee and Simon finally becoming an item. It's more or less hinted at that, Mal is going to fall in love with Inara, or at least, I shouldn't say fall in love, but at least she's staying on the ship, and their relationship is strongly hinted at that they're going to work out and become an item.
Right. And you see that Kaylee and Dr. Simon are both together, and basically River becomes like a co-pilot.
More or less.
Because for Malcolm, and it all works out. It's just sad, some of the deaths, obviously. But, one thing I thought was cool and just a great attention to detail in the show and in the movie was anytime you hear them say like a phrase like, there's nothing on this earth or this world that could keep me from this or something like that, instead of saying of this world or this earth, they say in this verse. And I just thought that was really cool how they paid that much attention to detail where they said that instead of nothing on this world or nothing on this planet. Or, you know what I mean? Like,
I think that's a credit to Whedon and just how he always is, thinking ahead and really immerses himself in whatever world he creates.
Yeah, very much so. And so basically, I mean, it's a happy ending, and they tied up a lot, but there was just a couple of things that I wish they had gone a little more in depth with like Inara and Malcolm's relationship and things like that. But I love the show and I love the movie, but watching it again, I can see how somebody now watching it might think there's some lacking in it, just because it was made in a time that's not today.
No, not at all. So we can, we could see critiques and some, things like that, or people that may watch it and say, yeah, you know what, I don't really see what all the hype's about.
Right, right.
All right, and so that's going to wrap things up for us here on this edition of Nerdy by Nature. So be sure to be on the lookout for our next episode. Of course, big blockbuster movie just dropped this month, that being It Chapter 2. It came out on September the 6th. And so we're going to go ahead and give you a review and recap of that movie. We'll also start with the It series as a whole, more or less, going back to the original mini TV series back in 1990. Then we'll go over It, the remake from 2017, and of course go over It Chapter 2 as well. So be sure to share this with your friends and family. Hit that like button. There's still time to be one of our first commenters. So feel free to leave those and let us know what type of content that you'd like to hear, that you'd like to listen to. We're happy to appease the fans and listeners here at Nerdy by Nature. That's what we're here for. We appreciate you guys listening as always. So signing off, I'm Agent Smith.
And I'm Captain Rogers. God bless.